All right, we'll get started in the interest of time. Again, if you would enter your name, what year you are profession-wise, or what program you are studying, as well as your location, your state, that greatly helps us with tracking and awarding current AHEC scholars who may be enrolled in other states appropriate hours and working with those offices as well. To introduce myself, my name is Corinne Gappert. I'm the Associate Director of Community Programs for the Southeast South Dakota Area Health Education Center located in Yankton, South Dakota. My counterpart, Michaela, who you may see popping on and off camera, she's the Center Director for the Northeast South Dakota AHEC located up in Aberdeen. She and I run our AHEC Scholars Program on the eastern part of South Dakota. We have West River and East River, if you know South Dakota geographically. So we run our program pretty well, and we're very excited to have Damon Leadercharge with us today. We work with Damon on the HOSA board advisors. So we've worked with him in that aspect through the K through 12, but now it's really exciting to work with him in the post-secondary level. Let me just pull up his introduction quick. So our speaker today, again, Michaela and I are very excited to have. So Damon, thank you for giving up your evening to be with us. But Damon Leadercharge is an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe and is currently the Director of Tribal Outreach for USD's Office of Academic Affairs and the Assistant Coordinator of the Sanford School of Medicine's Diversity and Inclusion Office. Damon has a great wealth of experience both in the IHS, or the Indian Health Service sector, and in the educational sector as well. So Damon, I'll let you share a little bit more about yourself, and you have the floor.
Thank you again. Much props to you and Michaela for inviting me. It's a definite honor. First and foremost, mitaki tokiala chi wopula chi chapalo yuha chante wasdena pechuza papalo. Damon Leadercharge Machiab Suchangu Ogolala Lakota Hemielo. I greeted you all as relatives. Again, I'm thankful and honored for this time. And that introduction, part of that introduction was just what I had mentioned, and also greeting you with a heartfelt handshake, figuratively and literally. As you can see, I'm an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, and I used to only introduce myself as such until my mother scolded me in a good way, as she should, because I don't only represent my paternal side, but I represent my maternal side. So paternally, I come from the Sichongo, AKA the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. That's our traditional moniker for our sub-band. And maternally, I come from the Ogallala. That's my mother's maternal sub-band of the Lakota. And I say that with the utmost humility and honor. I'm just, ecstatic to be able to share in such a short amount of time. What we're going to cover, like what I had mentioned, was Oceti-Sakowin history and treaties, tribal public health, revitalization through culture, creating networks and understanding. Those are our semester in themselves, each bullet point in any respective institution. So it's going to be very broad stroke. I can't say enough about your questions. To me, in a nutshell, that's encouragement, that's hope for you all and what you represent in terms of the testament of your families and wanting to create change, make change, assist change. And I just, again, it gives me a lot of encouragement in the work that I do in terms of what needs to happen here in South Dakota and throughout the nation and globally. Sadly, this was my highlight of the day, but so I am here at the University of South Dakota, and I'm in the Institute of American Indian Studies currently. This is where I'm housed. I also share an office over at the Sanford School of Medicine, but we have some really nice digs here. You're ever on campus, come visit me. I'm in Old Main 203. And it's a testament to our leadership, from President Gestring to Provost Hackemer to Dean of the Med School to Dean of the Law School, who I work with, and our Director of the Institute of American Indian Studies, Associate Professor Dr. Elise Boxer here at the Native Studies program. But it has to be mentioned, that the relationships aren't the best here in South Dakota between tribes in the state, but there's been some great rays of hope. Again, like I'd mentioned earlier, if we're not the first institute of such in terms of the American Indian Studies, we're one of the first in the nation to ever have this. So I really feel like, parallel to the Year of Reconciliation per the late Governor Mickelson in 1990, to legislators in the 40s and 50s having conversations that we have to do something for tribal students and developing the institute. So President Gestring revitalized the institute when it went away about in 2008. So we've been doing some great work in terms of those revitalization efforts. So, it's not always all doom and gloom. You're going to get some of that here, but it is our reality. But again, your questions and these efforts really help us, break through the history of truth that we really, that need to be told. And so we'll get to that. So again, my mother helped me develop and modify my introduction, and I'm glad she did that, because that we get so wound up in paternally I come from here, but also maternally I represent her side and her teachings. So I'm second generation USD or Shigmani Tuoyate, the Coyote Nation. On the left is a very dear picture to me. That's my mother graduating in 1976 from the University of South Dakota, and that's me in her arms. That's my great grandfather on the left, Daniel Badwoon. So traditionally, if I was home introducing myself, I would say I come from Daniel Badwoon's Tioshpe of the Allen District of the Ogallala Lakota. Paternally, I come from the Louis Leader Charge Tioshpe of the community of Parmalee. That tells a more specific story of the teaching that I represent. She was pre-med, but once I came, she changed up her major so that she could start working and start a career earlier than later. I was pre-med at one time. I live my life through students that I work with now here at the med school, and other work that I do with. There is a partnership between Mass General Hospital, Harvard, and Rosebud through the Indian Health Service. So we have health experiences out there that have started over 6 years ago. So I live my life through the med students, and I always talk to my mom. I was like, we could have did it, we should have did it, but we know that our next generation are going to do it. It's critical that we grow our own, and that's easier said than done. In respect to a lot of the questions that you have, but to me, solidarity is greater than allyship, because you're coming from a level playing field. So I'd really, take that seed there, and if you could ever see yourself working within tribal nations, that's how we're really gonna, make movements. If it's a year commitment, if it's a 5-year commitment, well, you're a dentist, you're a nurse, you're a future doctor, it's going to strengthen your CV and your resume. To me, when health learners and providers go out there, it's a win-win-win. You're assisting in increasing the quality of healthcare for our tribal members. You're bridging a gap between non-natives and natives, and you're strengthening your CV resume. So on the right is the Native American Alumni Dinner that we've had for 11 or 12 years now. So that's my sister who got her MSW here, Lila Rose Leader Charge. She got her undergrad at Sinte Gleshka, which is a tribal college and university, 104 here in South Dakota, and my brother Leon. And we're second generation Shigmani Tuoyate. My son doesn't know it, but he's going to carry on the tradition as a third generation. This is a really dear picture to me. I think this is one of the first pictures I've seen of him sitting up. At that age, he's no longer that age. He is a monster baby at this point. At 3 years old, he'll be 4 years old. I need to really add an updated picture in this, but he's going to carry on our tradition here at the University of South Dakota. This is my Tiwahe, parts of my Tiwahe and Tioshpe. I realized in the presentation that I don't have my full Tiwahe. So we have 4 as a very sacred number for us. 4 directions, and then 7. So you got your 4 directions or west. We always start with the west and we go clockwise. West, north, east, south. What's above us to the heavens. what's below us, Grandmother Earth, and what's within us, within our heart, that's 7. So 4 and 7 are very sacred numbers. My case in point for 4 is we have, if I don't have this diagram developed yet, I've seen a number of them, so I really need to get on it and develop my own. But for Tiwahe and Tioshpe, you see a root word in there that you've read or heard in the background, a tipi. T is lodge. So Tiwahe is in reference to a nuclear family, the first cyclical circle that I was talking about. Tioshpe is your extended / complete family. That would be your second circle. Oshpaye, right there in the word of Tioshpe, is your community. So again, lodge and Oshpaye is putting together your lodge and your community of lodges, which it's literal and figurative in terms of your extended family / complete family. So Oshpaye is your community, your third circle. Your fourth circle is Oyate, which you've probably seen earlier or ever seen reference. Oyate real generically translates into nation / people. So this is my nuclear family, bits and pieces in here. My companion on the right, my better half, Deidre. This is our daughters, her daughters. They're in our way, we don't have no word for stepdaughter, stepson. They're my daughters nonetheless. So she's blessed me with a son and 3 older daughters. My son is a definite prince among princesses. So that's our older daughter in the middle, and our youngest daughter, Rowena, is in the other picture on the left. So again, parts of my Tiwahe, parts of my Tioshpe, we don't have a such thing as a great aunt, great uncle. They're all our grandmothers, they're all our grandfathers. We don't have a such thing as a second cousin, fourth cousin. They're all our sister cousins, all our brother cousins. So I have a question. If anybody wants to blurt it out, you're more than welcome. If you want to put it in the chat, and this is not to make you feel bad or discourage you in any way. This is if you have the answer to any of these or you're quick at Googling, please do. I have to look up the number for the federally recognized tribes of the nation because that does change. So if anyone would like to take a guess, your best guess, Corin, anybody? I've had the best. Sure, yes.
I am not the person to ask. I probably should be better at this than I have living in South Dakota for 12 years now. Going on almost 13. If anybody has a guess, feel free to put those in the chat. We have an answer as 9 or 7 for South Dakota. Higher or lower?
For South Dakota, that's spot on.
Perfect.
My little twist on that to help you remember, don't count casinos because Cheyenne River, per their elders, opted out of going through the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act to develop an Indian casino. So 9 is for South Dakota. Okay. Any guesses or thoughts on the national? There you go, 574.
Good job.
So I was gonna say, and this was going to be my highlight of the day. So as an advisor, I got asked to help develop a drum group here for USD. So USD formally and informally as a drum group that was student initiated. And it organically happened, and it's been great. We get called on quite a bit, and we got called on to do a presentation / performance for the middle school and high school, and it went great. It was, I was a little nervous, excited, just like I was for this. I want to say the right things. I really want to start this awareness and education and take off in a good way, and it went awesome. So I think the middle schoolers were the ones that were the most attentive, as we all know, as past high schoolers. Sometimes our attention can wean off, but it was a great morning. And then getting ready for this, I can't say enough about this day. So in terms of the 574 recognized tribes, the last POTUS signed 6 into law. So that's the reason why I even have to look that up. I remember when it was 568. I can't remember what it was prior. It takes an actual act of Congress in order to become a federally recognized tribes. There are 400 plus tribes awaiting federal recognition on the docket. whether they have a rightful, justful case for that. The majority of them just want to, again, utilize the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act in order to create revenue. I'm sure some have on that list do have a just reason to wanting to become a federally recognized tribe. There are some tribes that are state recognized, and that's a very different. So this is the Census 2020 map, which shows you those 574 recognized tribes, and you can see they're throughout the nation. My takeaway for this is, you know, we are 1 to 2% of America, so we're forgotten and sometimes unknown. But we don't do here in the Great Plains region what they do in the Southwest in terms of the Navajo tribe, which is a huge land base because they're consolidated. The Southwest tribes don't do what the West Coast tribes. The West Coast tribes don't do what the Northeast tribes. The Northeast tribes don't do what the Seminoles and Miccosukee do. So we're similar but very different. Even here in South Dakota, you know, Ogallala and Sicangu are the Rosebud and Pine Ridge that I mentioned earlier, are sister tribes, but they'll tell you that they're different in a heartbeat if you assume that they're the same. There's even running jokes that are interchangeable. Humor is a definite medicine for us in terms of everything we've been through. We still can twist it into something humorous. Again, that really gets us through, you know, the ups and downs. So federally recognized tribe in a nutshell means that you're eligible for services per federal agencies, the Indian Health Service, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, the Bureau of Indian Education, which is funded through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Health and Human Services, et cetera. Here's a map that the state has. It's a great map. In a nutshell, I think in terms of really, you know, conveying some education and raising some awareness here, you see that the larger land-based tribes are on the West River. The West River tribes are all Lakota. We represent the Oceti-Sakowin, aka the 7 Council Fires, and that breaks down into 3 different sub-bands per the dialects: Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. So you can just see visually that Cheyenne River has the largest land base. Standing Rock would be number 2 in terms of land base. Their uniqueness is that they have all 3 dialects there: Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and also they're in part of their reservation or their tribal homelands are in North Dakota. Pine Ridge would be number 3. Rosa would be number 4. In terms of enrollment, Pine Ridge would be number 1 with about 55,000 federally recognized tribal members, but they don't all reside there. At most, 2/3 reside there. You'll find a lot Rapid City, Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, throughout the nation. And second for enrollment would be the Rosebud Sioux tribe at about 46,000. Again, at best, 2/3 residing there, the rest throughout the nation. Cheyenne River would be number 3, Standing Rock would be number 4. So for your East River tribes, those are primarily Dakota with also Nakota. So these tribes had ended up here due to the Minnesota Uprising, which is a whole nother semester or a half a semester at least. And again, so they have been displaced from what had happened in Minnesota, and some of them, like some of them are breakoffs of the Santee, which aren't even on this map. See, you have Flanger, Santee. They're all, most of them, from my knowledge, are mostly Isanti or Santee. Some of them are tribes, again, the Crow Creek. They were set down the river from Minnesota down to Sioux City, and they ended up, and that's where they were put. You know, they're all descendants of the exiled. I've heard them, you know, call themselves that. The Spirit Lake tribe in North Dakota is a break off of the Sisseton Wahpeton people. They ran to Canada to be with Sitting Bull, and eventually they were brought back, and they ended up where they're at in Spirit Lake, aka Devil's Lake region. To me, this is huge. What you're learning in terms of your awareness and education is really going to assist in breaking down stereotypes. So we stand on two very important treaties, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. I don't want to really play too much into divide and conquer, but if you were to compare our treaties to other nations, the other 500 plus nations, ours is very substantive. So we really feel that we have a claim to better healthcare, to ensure that our inadequate funding turns adequate, because these treaties were made in perpetuity, and to us, we're told per the constitutions, they're the supreme law of the land. So again, there are stereotypes that we get free healthcare, we get free education, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, my little brief explanation on this is the Treaty of 1851, and you really have to do your historical contextualization if you want to take a deeper dive. But a lot of stuff obviously was happening pre-1851, the 17 years between 1851 and 1868, and thereafter, the Indian Wars, the Indian battles, whatever you want to call them. So to me, in the history that I've done, a lot of what I'm telling you, I've learned throughout my life, personally and professionally, and that would be examples of that started out when I was a young boy and hearing all these conversations on a front porch between different community leaders just talking about this needs to happen, this treaty was broken, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's like, all right, the US put us on this left map. We're going to let you guys do what you're going to do. Hunt, live your nomadic life. And then something was discovered in the Black Hills, gold, which meant that this treaty was starting to be, our boundaries per this treaty were starting to be encroached. And again, trying to really fast forward this and do this briefly, what had happened was our ancestors, in terms of deep thought and prayer, felt that it was important, critical, imperative, paramount for us to stand up and fight and die for what we believed in. Our creation stories are born in the Black Hills. The Black Hills is our Jerusalem. It is our Mecca. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I really want you to take away from this that we gave away millions and millions of acres, not only millions of acres, but timber rights, mineral rights, water rights. So we believe per our ancestors and the treaties, again, these agreements, these contracts in perpetuity, that we prepaid for our healthcare, our education, our housing funding, our law enforcement funding. But at best, across the board, every one of what I just mentioned is funded at 50 to 60% at best. And sadly, we're pushed into a corner to play divide and conquer in terms of, hey, we deserve this because of this treaty that was made. So our treaty of 1851 to 1868, our treaty of 1868 has, I think, 30 pages, which includes all the signatures of our leader, of our headsman. And it's got 16 articles. With all due respect, some of the other tribes, even some in the area, are one-pagers because of what they had already went through, being beaten down to conquered in terms of westward expansion. So we should not be poverty-stricken, even if we just talked about the gold that was stolen. It's never about that for us, because the Black Hills, again, are where our creation stories are born, and sacred sites are pointed out to us through our star knowledge. But I've heard that valuation of the gold at 5 trillion. We should not be in deplorable conditions, third world conditions that we are. Again, we play a part in that. I can touch base on that a little bit more later, and that's very pertinent to some of the questions that you all ask. So it's important. You're that representative now when these stereotypes take off, that we get free this, free that. No, we prepaid for what was promised to us per these agreements. Indian country, if you don't know, is a pretty popular phrase. Personally, there's some great data here in terms of the graphics. Personally, I hated the word Indian. I hated the word American Indian. It took some evolution and growth and even maturity for me to kind of get over that. I double majored in Native Studies and Addiction Studies here at USD, and some really great discussions to debates. And I had a relative really, his analysis was great. Indian is a misnomer. Columbus bumped into us and thought he was in India. But we own it now because it's a treaty term. So again, if you do that historical contextualization, and that's what this relative have really helped me to fully understand this more and to respect it, is there's a lot of relatives that literally died and fought during those treaty times. So it's to be respected, and some people might not respect it, some won't. I do, finally. So it doesn't matter what you call me. Per my introduction, I know where I come from in terms of the teachings that I represent. This can get very complex, probably just in terms of a lot of the monikers and labels that I'm using. This is the breakdown of our traditional governance system. Like I had mentioned, the Ocheti Shakoi, aka the Great Sioux Nation. This is how we break down. And this is per our dialect in terms of tribal bands, the sub-bands, the sub-bands of bands. And again, it can get very complex. I had a relative, a friend from New York come out. I do give a tour of Rosebud if there's any way we can ever make that happen. I did just take the president's Student Leadership Institute out there on the USD's charter. I had a microphone. I think we made it through 8 communities. So per our tribal constitution, we break down into 20 communities, and I usually the community identity tour, I can get you through 10 of the 20. So it was a really awesome experience for all of us to see how we really break down. Like that map that I showed you earlier for the Rosebud Sioux tribe, we sit on 1 million acres. So that tells you that Pine Ridge, the Ogallala Sioux tribe, the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, they're even on bigger land bases. So my friend that had visited, I'm using Native American, I'm using Sicangu, I'm using Ogallala, Rosebud Sioux tribe, Ocheti Shakoi. She's like, wait, you said there's 9 tribes, but you just named off like 30 different monikers. So it can get really complex. And if you ever want to take that deep dive, I'll show my email at the end. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. I won't overload you, but I do have some really great PDFs and directions I can point you. There's a really good documentary called Seventh Generation that does a great depiction on an intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, and it's done by Jim Warren, who is a brother to Dr. Don Warren. Dr. Don Warren is a definite mentor, a visionary in terms of tribal public health. He's got a lot of great stuff on YouTube. He has peer-reviewed articles. He did his undergrad at Stanford, or he got his MD from Stanford, and he's got an MPH from Harvard. So he's out to Johns Hopkins now. He was up at University of North Dakota, but he made his move out to Johns Hopkins. So this is how we break down. And again, it can get very complex, but there's a lot of pride and empowerment and self-identity in this because it's from our language. Make sure there's no questions. Okay, awesome.
Damon,
So
if there
again,
are, I'll hop in. I'll write some down
okay.
too. But if you see something and you want to answer it, feel free to do so. But we'll definitely have time at the end to do that.
Okay. I don't really have a watch showing or a time showing, so just let me know what time.
Okay.
Maybe
I think
10
we've got
minutes.
about a little over, I mean, it's 7:34, so half hour, 45 minutes. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I mentioned the Black Hills. So as you can see, this is the image from above. And what our ancestors already knew is how special this place was. So there's satellite images. There's this image that NASA has taken, and they start to get it in terms of what it really represents. It looks like a heart, right? And that's what it is to us. It's the heart of where we come from. And the Pahasapa to me is a contemporary moniker for the Black Hills. I've heard He-Sapa, and the traditional is Pete-Sapa. If you visit Wind Cave, they have quite a bit of our oral tradition there in terms of that's where we entered, again, per our creation stories. And it's because of our relationship with the bison. There's stories that are documented that, they made relatives with us, and they said they would be our sustenance, they would be our relatives if we came out from underground. And that's, that's what it became. And those stories go back generations to generations. The bison was our Walmart. There's diagrams that show every usage of the bison once we took out a bison. And dances with wolves and the other, which and then there's artwork showing buffalo hunts, fast moving, fast paced buffalo hunts. Traditionally, it really didn't happen like that in terms of my research. I mean, that's the adrenaline alone would make the meat sour. We all know that. I think even how our beef is slaughtered or taken out, however you want to call it, they don't know they're being taken out. They're thinking they're sticking their head into a bucket, thinking they're going to eat again, and that's again to ensure that there's no adrenaline in the blood. But there's a ceremony for that to happen. It's done in a really good way, and we made that promise that we wouldn't waste anything, because again, it's our Walmart. The bones are used for tools, the hides used for coverings, even the stomach is used for containers. We do have some great diagrams that show the usage of the whole buffalo in terms of, again, whence it was taken out. I helped develop a curricula. Again, I mentioned the Mass General Health partnership between Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Mass General Hospital and Harvard partnership between the Rosebud Sioux Tribe and through the Indian Health Service. When I was a health administrator for the Rosebud Sioux Tribe prior to coming back to USD. Next month or April will be 4 years I'm here back at USD. This is my 4th time back since being born here and then finishing my degrees. And I love it here. I really appreciate the work that we're doing in terms of growing our own from undergrad to graduate, and ensuring, that the students we're recruiting, that we're retaining and we're giving them all the mentorship and all they need to succeed. So I developed this curriculum, and I had one of the fellows pose a question to me, like, if there's 2 things that you could narrow down why there's such the disparities, the social determinants of health and all. Because as you're learning, it's very nuanced, a lot of dynamics. Just for our region, just for our tribes. Again, we're 1 to 2% of America, so our 574 tribes are thrown into a melting pot. But again, one tribe doesn't fit all. And I'm like, I don't know if I can narrow that down. I said, I'm gonna need some time. I think they gave me a week or 2. I said, I need to think about this. I need to pray on it. And one of the 2 that I came down to was the decimation of the way of life in terms of a relationship with the bison. As you can see, a lot of what has been done to us, and this is hidden. So there's shock value that should be happening in terms of what you're learning. And take a deeper dive and implore you professionally and personally, whether it's through me or other means, please do so, because we only get 1 paragraph and in any history book, as you all know. So it was the decimation of this relationship we had with the bison, and that started in the 1500s. Again, a lot of this is very strategic and systemic. The next would be the boarding school era. The more I look into this, I think I just admitted, I can't remember who I admitted this to, but I think I was in denial about some of this. Because there are horrible stories on one side of the continuum and there are good stories. But for the most part, if they're going to kill the Indian and save the man per this policy, per this quote, that's where they were literally beating, washing mouths out when they talk their native tongue. How sad is this picture on the left? We all have, if we don't have children, we have baby cousins, we have baby nieces and nephews. Could you imagine your relatives being stripped from your home? So this is the 72-year era. The more history I do, and I'm hearing more about the history because my better half, Deidre, works for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. It's a tough acronym, but Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland just initiated an investigation, and they're part of this investigation in terms of some funding that they received. So they're finding out more and more. And I have to, I've been using the word diabolical because it was strategic. So you have your, back then, again, the historical contextualization tells us that there were PhDs, JDs, and MDs, again, working on this diabolical scheme to ensure that the system breaks us down. So one friend, Dr. Nick Estes, who's from Lower Bull and is an alum of the University of South Dakota, shared some research he found that, and that's where I got the word that I'm using the word diabolical, because it was that they had researchers that had the caloric breakdown in order to flip us. We all know bison is very trendy now, right? And if you see pictures of our relatives, our ancestors, they don't really look like me. I'm older. I'm retaining a lot of, I like to eat, but we were very strategic in everything we did, even hunting and eating. So they knew the exact caloric intake it took to break us down and to flip our diet. That's what he found in his research. So to me, the decimation of the way of life through the breaking down our relationship with the bison affected our overall lifestyle. And the boarding school era affected our future generations. So this is where historical trauma really started to take place. And this is where intergenerational trauma what began. So I've heard comments throughout my life that get over it, move on. It's a lot easier said than done. Our ancestors already know the strength of our DNA in our blood. We've been over researched in terms of our resiliency. And, even, the study of blood, which is epigenetics, is starting to find out, that's why we're carrying a lot of this. And some of what you're learning, our own tribal members don't want to learn. They don't care to learn about their own history and culture because they're just trying to survive. Whether they live a healthy style, unhealthy lifestyle, or a dysfunctional lifestyle, they're just trying to make it. So again, we still sit on a continuum though, in terms of whether we're Christian contemporary or traditional. If anyone has ever seen a sweat lodge ceremony, I'll show that later. 40 plus years ago, that was illegal. It was the introduction I gave in my language was illegal 44 plus years ago. It took the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act for us to be able to pray, sing, and do our ceremonies. So for 100 years, all of that went underground. Again, systemic, diabolical, very strategic. so we had, these are most of the youth group. This is the youth group that was part of this repatriation of some relatives from Carlisle Indian School, which was in a past slide. This was a very maddening, sad, powerful moment for me. So part of their repatriation, it took them 4+ years to really get to, for Congress, our state and federal delegates had to get involved. And they were just at a conference out in Carlisle, and they came upon these graves and they found out they were our relatives. So they initiated this. And this is a procession of about 80 to 100 cars. I joined them in Sioux City. So they tried to follow their trail on how the research, how they were taken from their homes. So they started in Sioux City. That's where I jumped in. It usually takes me about 4.5 hours to get from Sioux City to Rosebud. It took 12 hours that day, but it was powerful. We went through Winter, we went to Wagner, and everybody just split and showed their respect because they knew we were coming back with their relatives. Towards the back, there's a vehicle pulling a trailer. That's where those 9 baby caskets were. And the spiritual leader that assisted with this, again, they followed their trail on how they were taken from their home and taken out east. They were taken to a point on the other side of Bonesteel, Fairfax, where a ferry. They were taken from Rosebud on the other side. I can't remember what it's called. And they were put on a ferry, and that's how they were taken to a train station. But he mentioned when he prayed over these, they were still clutching their culture figuratively and literally. All of them had a baby horse doll or a baby bison doll. A lot of our relatives that died out there, passed away out there, died of broken hearts. They were beaten, they were abused, physically, emotionally, etc., etc. So yeah, it was a range of emotions, but it was still, a lot of pride and a lot of empowerment in terms of we can come together for our relatives. This is a sweat lodge ceremony, which I mentioned earlier. Lakoi Choka is our traditional life ways. We don't have a word for religion, with all due respect. The closest we get to a word is Wochekye, which is the value of prayer. And kind of what I'm conveying is, it's something that we walk with, and I really feel that's where our foundation is to, overturning those health disparities, and we're in an era of revitalization in terms of our language, songs. I really feel that's where it's going to come from in terms of, flipping. I know we're planting some really strong seeds. I hope I see the tipping point, and that's me still being an optimist. But for me, just the other day, I'm 19 years clean and sober. It took a legal intervention. I never wanted to be on TV, but I always wanted to be on TV, but not for a high-speed chase, in a nutshell. But I got a second chance, and I'm very blessed. I wasn't raised that way. My mother did her best. I just made some decisions that took me way off my path. But eventually, it was the mentorship that I gained through a lot of different colleagues who I now feel are relatives, that took me home to the ceremonies, the language, and the songs. And I know from my personal and professional experience, that if I can do it, anybody can do it. I messed around in that lifestyle of drugs and alcohol and was part of the problem for 11 to 12 years. And I'm very grateful and blessed to say that I'm now part of the solution. I don't wear it on my sleeve, nor do I hide it. People know what I used to do. So I feel it's more effective when I have relatives, native and non-native alike, that reach out, that really want some assistance and want to hear my story. And it seems to be a lot more effective. And so it took me home. I was with a quote unquote medicine man who passed away 4 years ago last October, named Roy Stone. He was the last of his kind. And he shared with me through our traditions and our ceremonies how to live a healthy existence. That's all he wanted was health for his people. And it's been very different for me since he's passed on, but I know I have a lot of teachings that must be passed on. That's what our ancestors have done, was they want to give these teachings that were given to them to make sure that they carry them on. Real quick, this is made out of willows, so it's us utilizing elements of the earth to purify and to send our prayers. It's very trendy on the coast, especially I've heard in the West Coast. So, if there's ever that want or any guidance on this, I have my teachings, but sadly, some of what is taught through this is being twisted and turned into an experience that, I don't know if you've seen the story on 60 Minutes down in the South, and people are, offering. I'll just say there's a difference between a fee and an honorarium. If anyone ever offers you to take in a sweat lodge ceremony or an EP and wants to charge you, that's your red flag. You should never be charged to pray. But it is a beautiful way of life, and it got me to where I'm at, and I can't say enough about it.
Damon, real quick, are you switching gears, or was this a bad time to interrupt?
Nope.
Okay.
No,
Go ahead.
No, this is the end. This is my
Okay.
email. Wopula is our value of gratitude. I don't know how much more time we got.
I was just going to ask if you could talk a little bit more on the health inequity or the health impacts that you've seen and experienced. I think I speak for everyone, and hope I do, I suppose. I've learned a lot about the history. Can you share a little bit more about some of those health impacts, or what you saw in your previous role with yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
As the health administrator, I was the conduit between tribal leadership there in Rosebud and the healthcare systems leadership there in Rosebud at the Indian Health Service. We break down into 12 regions. The Great Plains region is our region, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa. And we were underfunded and understaffed, but I loved it. I had 5 to 10 things on my checklist. I was so busy, sometimes I didn't touch them once, just because as soon as I got in my office, it just took off. And that says a lot about, the work that needs to be done. Again, if you're thinking about, really wanting to affect or assist some kind of change in times of flipping those health disparities into parity, try to envision yourself working out there. I would implore that, because there's countless gaps. Me as a health administrator, I had a staff of about 7 or 8. Some of them are grant funded. We were each wearing 3 to 4 different hats. So we have quality workers out there. We just don't have the quantity. If you can see yourself out there, there's ways that we can ensure that, you can get over if there's reluctance or any concerns. There's ways we can help you get over that. But I can't say that enough, because we have, this relationship with about 4 or 5 different universities where they're coming out for at least 4-week rotations. I'm on the inside looking out, so we're really getting close to developing these experiences through an elective here at USD for our med students. Timing just really hasn't been on our side. Everybody's all in, whether it's Avera, Sanford, Monument, USD Med School, Indian Health Service, everybody's all in. We had a group ready to go out pre-pandemic. The pandemic happened, so that got canceled. We had another group ready to go out mid-pandemic, whatever that is. We all know that, but there was a spike, so that got canceled. And then we had another elective ready to go, and everybody signed up for their respective experiences, so we didn't get anybody. So we know the universe is kind of telling us that it's going to happen accordingly. But, I would, try to take in any experience you can. We can assist and possibly, you know, help work something like that out. But, take deeper dives in what I'm covering. I think that's really going to help you get to a point where you could possibly really see yourself out there. And I was trying to look for this information. Mrs. Deanne Jansen Eastman used to be the director of nursing at Nebraska University, which is a tribal college and university out in Rosebud. And we were trying to develop a partnership with them. She ran an assessment to a survey, and she did all the surrounding towns of Todd. So that's west of Todd is Bennett County, north of Todd is Tripp, east of Todd County is Millette, and south is Nebraska, Valentine, Nebraska, but Cherry. The vacancy rate for nurses was 80 plus. So that's 20 per county. And I think that didn't even include the in Rosebud. I might be exaggerating somewhat. I'd really have to check into that. But I would implore you, to take an experience and think about putting in a year to 5 years, and it's really going to strengthen your experience. And I think that's how we're going to really increase the access of quality health.
Damon, we've got some good questions, both previously and in the chat box that I'd like to ask. If you don't mind, we start running through some of those. The first one we have are, what are some health equity challenges that you've seen in South Dakota between on the reservation, off the reservation, or in general?
Again, it's very nuanced and can get complex very easily. So all of the tribes in this area, this is called South Dakota, are healthcare systems funded by the Indian Health Service through HHS. The inequities start with access to quality healthcare. Mm-hmm. That's literal access. Yep. So you have generations that have traveled to these hospitals. Let's just use Rosebud. Mm-hmm. They're traveling anywhere from 30 to 60 miles round trip because of the mistrust and distrust. Mm-hmm. Within that Teospite, they're only going when they have to. I mean, there's not much preventative work, healthcare work happening in terms of our side. Even myself, I only started using my healthcare that I got from USD 2 years ago when I had my son. Well, after I had him, I was like, I want to see another 20, 40 years. So in my mind, I didn't go to my own healthcare system because it was a crapshoot. If you're funded at 60%, you're more likely going to get a provider that isn't wanted anywhere else. So he doesn't want to be there, and because of underfunding and lack of respect, knowledge, you might sit there all day and not be seen, or you might sit there and get some cough syrup or some ibuprofen. So the inequities are, across the board. I meant to put the diagram where it shows inequalities, inequities, where it shows the children that are,
yep,
this has a box, and Dr. Warren uses that really well, as why is there a fence? And we, for our gaps or our fences are very wide, high, and sometimes long,
right,
and even deep, just in terms of how the dynamics that are involved.
I think what you said that really resonated is it's also your own cultural bias. I grew up very differently. I grew up not from here, and I've learned a lot in the last going to undergrad at USD, but also working in South Dakota with the AHEC. I've learned a lot, and I still have a lot to learn, but it's being aware that you have a lot to learn as a healthcare provider of your patients just as much as they have to learn from you. So it's that mutual respect as well as understanding your own cultural bias.
Yeah,
Um,
and also just to touch a little bit more
Sure.
on my own experiences, like when I was like had my son, I was like, I need to start doing preventative
Mhm.
maintenance on myself. And I don't know if some of if we have any doctors on here,
We
there
do.
used to be a really good doctor named Dr. Yelverton who retired from
Mhm.
the Vermilion Medical Clinic. As soon as I told him that, he was all business.
Mhm.
Yeah, he referred me to I needed to be referred. We might get referred in Rosebud because they don't offer those services there, specialty services there at Rosebud. We'll get referred to Sanford and Sioux Falls. Might not have resources to make it to Sanford if we get referred. More likely, because of the underfunding, they're only going to pay for priority one. That's life or limb. So even though you get referred, it's a crapshoot for you to have your bill paid. If you
Mhm.
get flown out, you might get stuck with a $30,000 to $50,000 bill for that flight. So it's very nuanced. It's very complex.
And there's definitely disparities that need to be addressed both on the health and the political side as well, and
Yeah,
insurance.
even ourselves, you know, I mean,
Mhm.
I've seen research and policy changes and stuff like that. We're very innovative in terms of food against food deserts. We have nothing but food deserts out
Right.
there. Hot Cheetos are and soda are in high demand, so there's
Mhm.
a huge supply of that. So a lot of that is on us too, in terms of really flipping the script and the
Mhm.
seeds that I talked about. We're planting. We have quality people that are, you know, we have. If you looked at Sichongu Corp, there's some really great work. There's actually a state grant that Sichongu Corp, that's the economic development and workforce development charter under the Rosebud Sioux tribe. They're doing some great stuff with their grant in terms of food sovereignty.
Good. I mean, that's important. That could be a whole nother topic. I've watched documentaries on food insecurity and sovereignty and all that across the nation. So that could be a whole nother story. Um, One of the questions I think is can resonate with all different types of healthcare professionals. Are there any factors to take into consideration or to ask about to improve treatment for our Indigenous or Native peoples?
Could you say that again?
Yep. So, are there any factors to take into consideration or to ask about to improve the treatment for our Native or Indigenous peoples? So, say they're coming to see you as a provider, what should you take into consideration when treating them?
Did you all see what I just did? I just moved my ear towards you all. That would be something to really take into thought. There's this. I've got into discussions and debates about it, and that, you know, there's information that's saying don't look a native in the eye, don't make eye contact. If I, my personally, and this is my own opinion and belief, but if I was home and I saw two first language speakers, what I just did to you asking that question, that's what he would do. Huh? How? He would acknowledge and honor what you're asking, and he would literally and figuratively, he wants to show you that he or she is in full listening mode. So it's not, I think I got twisted and turned, like, don't look a native in the eye. I just think that it's like, it's more of, right, I'm gonna really be in full mode in terms of listening to you. I would say be cautious with your eye contact and more about let them know you're listening to them. Another one would be a handshake. Handshakes are huge. They the softer, the more graceful, the more respect that you're conveying, versus how we're taught is to do a
Mhm.
grasp and how you doing, and so it's opposite for us. The lighter, the more graceful, the more respect you're conveying. Another would be ask open-ended questions. We know we have high unemployment rates. So what do you do for a living? That might shut them down. They might, you know, if we have high employment rates, there's any position that comes open is highly competitive. So you really have to have ties, even political ties, tribal political ties, to kind of get into those positions. So more more rhetorical or open-ended questions. You know, I would ask, you know, "Oh, so how are you? What's the matter?" instead of what's the problem or what's wrong. I learned that through my addiction counseling. No one wants to like, what's your problem? It's more like, what's the matter? You know, how can I help? And just listening. Um, and like we're doing today, we're breaking down stereotypes. Do your best not to run to those stereotypes. I still felt the question, do we live in teepees? There's
Mhm.
teepees out there, but there's no wireless, there's no insulation, there's no direct TV. So we've been acculturated. If you travel out to any respective tribe, you still probably see teepees in yards, and they're probably camping in them for a night or two, but we live in houses. And there was a time in my life that I hated that question. I had a chip on my shoulder, I was more immature, but now I know that's how we bridge these gaps in terms of coming to a better understanding.
Right. One thing, if you don't mind me adding, we had a physician speak about a year or so ago, and she goes up to Mobridge and works at IHS in Mobridge. And I asked the same question, what should you consider as a healthcare provider? And she shared that it's also about your patience and respect. You had mentioned if you have to get flown to Sioux Falls, which is one of our biggest cities, for those not from South Dakota. Some people and some, I mean, regardless of where you are social economically, we struggle with getting to a hospital, so they need transportation. Here in South Dakota, we don't have a whole lot of public transportation outside of our bigger cities. And even in the city Damon and I are in, they only run from 8 to 5, and that's with an appointment. So we struggle with getting to the healthcare clinics and seeing the doctors for follow-ups. And we also have issues with internet and a phone and paying those minutes or having reliable service. So it's understanding your patients, that it might not be that your patient doesn't want to be there. It's maybe they can't come. So getting rid of your bias at the door. I know we talk about that, but being reflective, being respectful, and asking those open-ended questions is something she said as well. So just wanted to add that.
Definitely really appreciate that. I think the pandemic taught us a lot. Technology really stepped up for us.
Mhm.
I'm more of an in-person guy, but
Right.
being able to host this and have this with you all, technology is assisting us. However, like you said, our tribal homelands are remote,
Mhm.
but there are even parts that are remote. That means there's no connectivity, there's no cell service. So assuming that everybody could jump on a Zoom, that's not very viable or feasible for tribal members sometimes. And yeah, I think connectivity, especially for the tribes, has been a major issue.
And that impacts not only health, but impacts employment and education and the whole realm of all of our social determinants of health, as we're all aware. One of the other questions that Michaela and I found really interesting, and we'd like to ask you, we changed our term from cultural competency to cultural humility because we don't feel that you can be competent in someone else's culture. How would you describe cultural humility?
A great question, and I've seen it pop up, and I've seen it on this list of questions, and I really appreciate that I don't even feel I'm competent, and that comes from our traditional teachings. We leave ourselves open to always wanting to learn and being able to learn. Even the word for our brain is nasula, uh, which su is a seed, and naka is head. So it's a seed within your head. It's like a seed within your head, what it's describing. So even from that, it tells us that leave yourself open to always learning and growing. And I was gonna share a medicine, Changlechka Waka, aka a medicine wheel that I developed for the resource center here at the med school. And there's a lot of variations of that throughout the world, and I was kind of reluctant, but I was pushed in a really good way to develop it. It turned out better than I envisioned, and I just think that there's no way that we can become fully competent, but leaving yourself open to always wanting to learn. This is our value system here based on the directions and the 4 direction to 7 direction song that I've learned. And even here, let's just use Woksape. In real general, we use it as wisdom, but there's 50 to 100 words that can fit into that value. So again, we can't become fully competent in anyone else's culture, but we can have the humility to really get to some type of realization and understandings about it. This is very basic. It's very tip of the iceberg, but again, it's become really popular here at USD. I was just envisioning that our med students will take a break from their studying and they'll be able to take this in. But again, it turned out better than I had imagined. There's a really great story on that. I presented on it a couple of times, but it took me a while to really come to terms with this. Again, there's a lot of variations. So yeah, the humility, the cultural humility is just continue to take those deep dives personally and professionally. Again, keep in mind that one tribe doesn't fit all. I can't say that enough. And remember that we're breaking down truth. We're busting down truths that some people don't want us to know or don't want us to learn. And it's critical for us to be able to bust down those truths to really get to some type of understanding.
Damon, would you email this to me so I can share it with our attendees should they wish, like when we do a
Definitely.
follow-up survey?
I have a couple other resources too,
Yeah.
and then I could send you that link to the 7th generation that's
That'd
on
be great.
Prime Video.
Okay.
It's like a 40-minute. It does a great job in terms of historical trauma and that depiction.
I think it's important to have some of those. So I'd greatly appreciate not only for our students here in South Dakota, but we have a number from Nebraska and California as well. So I'd like to share them with them if that's possible.
Definitely.
I'm just looking through this list, and if any of you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm gonna keep us on for about 5 or 6 more minutes. I'd like to be mindful of everyone's time here tonight. I think one question, maybe it could be a hot button one, but how can we appreciate tribal culture and tribal history, but not appropriate it? What would you say for that?
Again, I would turn your research into investigations. I'm sure, again, that map shows you that there's tribes throughout the nation, and what we have at our fingertips, whether it's a computer or your phone, there's a lot of resources out there. And taking some events and functions. USD has a Wachipi, aka powwow, coming up April 15th and 16th if you're in the area. It's one of the rock and Wachipi, aka powwows in the region, because everybody's kind of on winter hold right now. But there are countless gatherings like that, and there's a misunderstanding that it's just for natives, but it's a social gathering. It's a social dance with vendors, art vendors, food vendors. There are even instances during the Wachipi, during the powwow, that anybody can get out there and dance, whether they have regalia or not. Stuff like that. Sioux Falls has a lot of great stuff that's happening through the South Dakota Urban Indian Health offices. I wish I could be more involved up there because I know a lot of that staff, but I'm really pressed and spread thin here in Vermilion. Sioux City has some great stuff through the Native Youth Standing Strong group, which is a youth group, and the families that are involved in terms of what they do culturally. I would start there, really take some functions and events in. And I talked about what we did in terms of this morning presenting. When stuff is so good, there is still some negative that balances that out. I found out just before I got on that my daughter, who's a 10th grade at Vermilion High School, took in some racist comments from some boys. And again, it's just us busting those walls down in a good way. But there's going to be instances like that, and it was worse in the past, and I think we're really getting to a better time overall. So I would just, there are stuff to take part in. You can always reach out to me. That's a really, to me, there's no such thing as a dumb question. If we're really going to bridge these gaps, then any question is going to get us to where we need to be.
Sure. Awesome. I think one that we might end on, what can non-native healthcare workers in South Dakota do to help reduce health disparities for Indigenous peoples in our cultures and our communities?
Wow, that's
kind of loaded.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I I've said it a number of times. I would implore you to really take an experience out there to get a full understanding of what's really happening. And it's a win-win-win. And I mentioned it earlier, it'll strengthen your CV. It'll help bridge gaps between natives and non-natives, and it would help us increase the quality of healthcare if you could really see yourself doing something like that. And I think a lot of that is going to come from us in terms of revitalizing our traditional uh, teachings per our culture. But uh, it's going to take a lot of unraveling. This has been systemic, strategic, again, diabolical, and it's been happening for generations.
Mhm.
And we're trying to break cycles, whether it's addictions, violence, sexual violence. Uh, right now, I can only do what I can do with my tiwahe. I have siblings. So the two siblings you saw in that picture with my mother in the beginning were sober and clean. I have one sister that's trying. I think she's 2 years sober. And then I have another brother and a sister that are struggling with alcohol. They're
Mhm.
on and off the wagon. And, there are times like, why aren't you here for me? And I'm like, I got to be here for my family. There was a time I was always there for everybody. So just sadly, again, our gaps in terms of the disparities are long, they're wide, they're tall. But, they're it's not all doom and gloom. There's a way to make it, and everybody's story is different. But it's just, again, coming to a realization of what it's really all about. It's as you can tell, it's a long story. We're only about an hour and 5-10 minutes into it, but there's, just I mean, if you Googled Amherst and smallpox, that was
Mhm.
bioterrorism their way before blaming Middle Easterners for starting bioterrorism. That's stuff like that. I would implore you to read
Mhm.
the Dorgan report. That's Senator Dorgan, who was the chair of the Senate for Indian Affairs. That pointed out a lot of malpractices, et cetera, in our region. That just tells you the gaps that we have in terms of our vacancies in different positions throughout healthcare systems. So get on the front lines with us, and again, make sure that it's from solidarity rather than allyship. Solidarity puts us all on the same level. Sometimes allyship can kind of it kind of means that you're coming from a point of charity. And but I would just implore, coming from if your allyship's real, that it comes from a level of solidarity.
I really like that statement. I think that's probably going to be my takeaway from this. Um, for all of you that are AHEC scholars, I'll put up real quick, Damon, before I say thank you. If you would like to shoot myself, Corinne, or Michaela an email, we'd be happy to send a certification of completion or something similar to your AHECs. I also have a list of those who have attended, and I can reach out to your AHEC centers as you listed on your registration for your scholars hours, but we'll certainly be in touch. Should you have additional questions for Damon, feel free to shoot us an email as well. We also have both of our websites. If you'd like to just search South Dakota AHEC, you should be able to find Michaela and myself for that. But I will stop sharing. Go ahead.
Real quick, I don't want to. I forgot to mention this
No,
about
you're
my
fine.
daughter. I want to ensure that that I really appreciate. I seen some faces that kind of showed some concern that shot her into the mode of advocacy and almost activist because she found out who those boys were. She took it to her teacher. They tried to downplay it. She took it to the principal. She's hurt, mad, and sad about it, but this is where she's going to gain her strength. We want to ensure that our relatives are coming from a perspective of strength-based rather than victim-based. We do deal with entitlement versus privilege, divide and conquer. There's a lot of stuff I didn't really get to, but we have to come from being strength-based, which our ancestors truly were.
That's a great point to end on, Damon. Again, hopefully you took away at least one tidbit of information this evening from Damon's presentation. Mine is act as solidarity is better than allyship. I think that's my greatest takeaway. Again, should you have any questions, feel free to shoot Michaela and I an email. I'd be happy to share some additional information once I get that from Damon. But from all of us on and all of those that will be watching this recording here in South Dakota, Damon, thank you so much for spending your evening with us and sharing history and insight and personal experience for us to learn and grow and to be able to be a little bit more culturally humble throughout our education and our lives, regardless of if we're in South Dakota or other places. So thank you. The thank yous are rolling in the chat box if you want to open it and see all the students saying thank you. So to everyone else, I appreciate your spending your evening with us, whether it's early evening or late. I will let you get on with the rest of your evenings, and I appreciate you attending our South Dakota AHEC Scholars January session on health equity and understanding Indigenous populations here in South Dakota. So thank you, Damon. Have a great night.
Definite honor. Take care.